My talk's going to be very similar, but I also wanted to talk to you about cultivating confident creators and how I've learned that making isn't just about access to the right materials, but also about developing that confidence in our students to be makers. And right now, as we were talking about modeling, making mistakes, we're going to see if I remember how to do this. Yay! Okay. So I teach second grade, and during the first part of the school year this year, my second grade partner and I decided we would task the students with something that we thought would be really fun for them, a little design challenge. Get to know a partner, interview them and learn about them, and then make them something. You can use anything you want, but build a gift for your partner. We thought the kids would be thrilled at the idea of cutting and pasting and gluing an assignment that asked them to be creative and make something. We learned the hard way, however, that not all of our students were super excited about this. There were a handful of our kids that were actually pretty stressed out at the idea of this open-ended project that didn't come with a set of step-by-step directions. And so stressed out, in fact, that I had a couple of kids in tears in the middle of this project that was supposed to be fun for them. Sir Ken Robinson said in his 2006 TED Talk that we grow out of creativity, or more often now, we're actually educated out of creativity. It was in that moment with my students that I learned that this is actually happening quite a bit sooner than I realized. So I work with a group of 7-year-olds, and already they're feeling intense anxiety at the idea of a creative project. So why is it important to cultivate that creative confidence in our students? Well, our world continues to change rapidly, and we all know that the workforce is looking quite a bit different every year. In the World Economic Forum's 2018 job report, they point out some of the skills that are becoming more and more important in the workforce these days. They note in the report that 50% of companies are expecting to automate even more jobs. And while there will be new positions created, those positions are continuing to look a lot different from year to year. A lot of specialized work is now going to be contracted out, whereas in-house jobs are looking to be more flexible roles. Anything that can be done by a machine is going to be done by a machine if we can write an algorithm for it. And this is just more true year after year. The jobs in-house are going to be more flexible. They're going to require people to be more creative and to think more critically. And I thought it was really fascinating to see that number 3 on the list of desired skills is creativity. And number 1, innovation. Also in that same 2006 TED Talk, Sir Ken tells us that if you're not prepared to be wrong, then you're never going to come up with anything original. And a skill of makers and creators and innovators is that ability to fail forward and know that sometimes things aren't going to go your way, but they're willing to push through on that path towards creating something that is potentially going to be kind of amazing. This is an example recently of failing forward in my second grade class. We were working on a project that the kids kind of thought about. They wanted to create these urban wildlife cameras. They had a little bit of coding experience. We'd done a little bit of work in class. And so we thought, okay, we can start to put together this camera, and they wanted it to be motion activated, so animals would set off this camera when they walked by. And in the process of trying to create this, we failed quite a bit, over and over and over again, because I cannot for the life of me get those little motion sensors to work quite right. So the kids learned how to program the cameras, and they learned how to program the buttons, and somehow a small group of them decided that they would push forward, and they worked through all of those challenges and came up with this really cool project in the end that wasn't what they thought they were going to start with, but ended up being kind of amazing when it was finished. And there's a little Reese's Pieces peanut butter cup up there. And so they decided to add a makey-makey into this project with their Raspberry Pi computers. And now instead of a motion sensor, if you try to grab the Reese's peanut butter cup, the camera takes a picture of you. So we ended up with this great little spy camera instead of what we originally started with. Seymour Papert came up earlier in the evening. He's often referred to as the father of the maker movement. And so he questioned whether in his book Mindstorms, which was published in 1980, by the way, whether the computer is programming the child or is the child the one that's going to be programming the computer. With all of this technology that's around us all the time, I think that it's imperative that we are teaching our kids how all that technology is working. Things like artificial intelligence and machine learning sound a bit like things out of a Ray Bradbury science novel, but those things are in our lives daily already. And while I think it's super cute every time my 5-year-old nephew is talking to Alexa, I also kind of want him to grow up knowing how Alexa works and what's happening to his data every time he talks to Alexa. So I think it's actually cuter when sometimes we're chatting and he turns to me and says, "TT, can you turn off Alexa? Because I don't want her listening to me anymore." Most importantly, we know that it's the hands-on learning and the authentic experiences that really make learning sticky. This is not a new idea, as we said. Seymour Papert wrote about this in the 80s, and it was talked about before that as well. But it's still not common practice in all of our classrooms. Mitch Resnick echoed this idea in his book, Lifelong Kindergarten, when he talks about the idea that the most valuable learning experiences come when you're actively designing or building or creating, when you're making mistakes and then learning from those mistakes. Learning through making means that we're able to solve problems and think critically and learn to iterate and try different things. We know that children are naturally curious, so it's interesting to me that even at the age of 7, somehow this curiosity is being blocked in some way. So I was curious about what the barriers are to students' creativity. And recently, I listened to a really fascinating talk by psychologist Thomas Curran, who talks about the plague of perfectionism. And he's done all this research around the plague of perfectionism. And he notes 2 big ideas that lead to this perfectionism in our students. One is the increase in social media in the last 10 years. And so sort of not surprisingly, there is this kind of negative impact that's coming from social media in students' lives. And he talks about the idea that students are surrounded by all these images, these perfect lifestyle images in social media. And so our students, even as young as my 2nd graders, are developing this perfectionist mentality and this anxiety around the idea of having to be part of this perfect lifestyle and do things perfectly all the time. The second cause that he talked about that was really fascinating to me was the way we rank and sort students in schools. So we know that this happens all the time. We have testing, we have honors classes, we have SATs and AP tests, and we have even just our classroom assessments that are creating this intense anxiety in students. And while some of it is a bigger systemic issue that seems really challenging for a classroom teacher like myself to work with, I can still think about the culture in my own classroom around assessment, because I'm not by any means against assessment. A well-written assessment will help me create more individualized instruction for my kids. But if I'm developing a culture in my classroom in which testing is stressing my students out, then I need to think about that culture around assessment. It also seems that fewer and fewer students are given time to just play anymore and to create and to make, that they're living these overly planned and overly scripted lives most of the time. This is why I'm lucky to work at a school that's a no homework school. And we're really passionate about the idea that students get to go home and they get to spend time playing and making and hanging out with family. We may sometimes send them home with projects that they want to continue to work on or games that we taught in class. But for the most part, we encourage them to go home and find their passions and follow those passions. And while this was at first a bit of a transition for our 2nd grade students and their families, the idea that we weren't sending home homework for them to do, it's now really exciting to see the things that the students make and bring back to school to share. They're going home and building cardboard sculptures, and they're cooking with their families, and they're producing videos and slideshows about their vacations. And it's exciting to see the things that they make when they're given the time to make them. So how do we help nurture the creative confidence in our students again? First off, like everyone else has said tonight, just giving them the time to make will help nurture that creative confidence in them again. We constantly are telling our students that practice makes permanent when it comes to all the core subjects. The same goes for creativity. That the more we practice creativity, the more confident we might become in our creativity. In the book Empower, the authors and educators A.J. Giuliani and John Spencer remind us that standards are just the architect's blueprint, and we're still the builders and designers in our own classrooms. And so making it a priority to find time for creating and making is still up to us. The impact on the students' mindsets when we make time for that creativity can be very powerful. And just giving them that time empowers kids as makers again. Secondly, like was brought up and fits really nicely, I just discovered, into the pie top constructionist method, is the idea that we can scaffold those creative and maker projects. So our projects don't always have to be completely open-ended projects. When I'm working with my own students, these are my 2nd through 4th grade kids up in these pictures right now, I always like to start everything with a direct lesson to teach them the new tool or the new skill still. And then I've put together these printable booklets that they can use on all the projects. So they have those directions to follow if they need them, but it's also easy for them then to break out and kind of make their own path within the project. We also will go out and find videos that they can watch, or we'll find projects on the Raspberry Pi sites or on Code Club World website or on Scratch websites, so that in our digital making projects, my young students can follow that step by step if they want to, or they can customize it. And I still like to give them really specific learning targets too, so that they have a really specific end goal in mind if they don't know where it is that they're going to get started. We sometimes also use templates for students to work from. So in our first digital design project this year, the students were given a template in Google Drawings of a snowflake they were supposed to make. And that way they could duplicate it and then customize it if they wanted to, or they could start from scratch. And all of those then got pushed out to the laser cutter, and the kids got to cut out their designs. Some of them looked identical to mine, and that was okay, because at least they tried. And some of them were able to get incredibly creative off of that template. When practicing creativity, artist and author Austin Kleon reminds us that everything is really just a remix, so it's okay to steal like an artist. Something that I've noticed in a lot of my students who suffer from that perfectionism and more of that anxiety is that they often think that you're only really creative or innovative if you've created something that's completely brand new. And what happens then is that this prevents them from ever getting started. So we like to remind them that it's okay to steal like an artist. And often our creative work really is encouraged by something we saw somewhere else or read somewhere else. A lot of creative projects really are a collaborative effort. Something that I made came from an idea that someone else came up with originally. So copying to learn is okay. How many of you have used Scratch before? I know there's a room full of educators, I don't know. Okay, great. So Scratch is a great example of that, and my kids love it for that reason. And for some, it was hard to get used to the idea of what Scratch calls remixing. So the idea that you find something you love and duplicate it, and then you change it and make it your own, and then share it back out into the world. But remixing encourages that idea again, that you still can be creative by starting with someone else's work and then changing it and customizing it. In all the design work that we do in our classrooms, when we're teaching the design thinking process, we like to remind students that ideating can also be about adding on to someone else's idea, and that is still being creative. We can also, as a couple others mentioned, model creativity and model that maker mindset in order to encourage our students' own creativity. And so I like to share all of my successes and failures, and more often failures than anything else, like this project that I've been working on for months and months and months, and is still not perfect, but the kids love to hear that I'm still working on it 8 months later, and I'm gonna get it going, but they like to hear the stories about the challenges and the pitfalls, and then how I worked through them. It's easy for us to say sometimes, with all the pressures around us, that we don't have enough time in our day to add more creative work into our classrooms. But the benefits of nurturing the students' creative confidence is really impactful in other areas as well. Making activities offer a safe space for students to practice failing forward, and it's a much more low-stakes arena than some of the other work that they have to do. Just this year, since the beginning of school year until now, I've already seen attitudes in my own classroom with my second graders change significantly. Whereas in the beginning of the year, they were easy to stop anytime they hit a challenge, they're much more willing now to figure things out, to try things a different way, to come up with new ideas, and to persevere through some of the hard things that they get stuck on. I asked my kids last week before I came down here what they thought about making in our classroom and why it was so important. So I wanted to share some of the things that they said about making in our classroom. And some of the ones I love are, we learn empathy because we're doing things for other people. We learn to try new things when something doesn't work, which I love. It's so great for them to ask me less and less for help and to ask each other more and more for help and to try and figure things out. And they're only 7, and I'm so impressed by them all the time. I love this. I stick with it even when it gets hard. And this isn't just in our making work. This is also in other assignments and work that they have to do as well. And my last favorite one is, we get to do what we want and still do what the teacher wants. So they love the idea that here's your template and this is what your teacher expects, but you get to go and you get to make it your own. For some of our students, making also finally gives them the opportunity to shine. And this is an example from last year of a 5th grade group that I worked with. And their teacher was so excited to let me know. One of the students in this image here was really struggling with 5th grade math all year, and he was really down about how he was doing in math. And so we came in and we brought in Raspberry Pi computers, and we were hacking Minecraft, and we were learning Python and doing all this coding. And all of a sudden, this kiddo who was really having a tough time with 5th grade math had become the leader in his group and was talking about XYZ coordinates, teaching the kids really basic algebraic expressions to help them decide where to place their blocks, and calculating area and perimeter to help him build the structure he was trying to build in Minecraft at the time. And his teacher was so excited to see him finally perk up and shine in math because he was given a new way of showing what he knew how to do. And this doesn't work, I don't think. But maybe most importantly, I'd say the biggest impact, of course, is that making in our classroom means that my kids are having fun with their learning. And I love this image of the kids playing with something that they built, and they put circuits together, and they programmed the buttons, and they got the screen and the camera working on their own. These are definitely not the expressions of my kids after we've done a really awesome worksheet. This is only the expression I get after we've done some kind of really amazing maker project. And I love seeing the way that they look and the excitement in their faces when they've been able to create something out of seemingly nothing. Thank you.